We saw your which car company is going to end up in an electric graveyard session at our recent show. And they were very much the topic of debate in the UK because they're a UK-based manufacturer. But from your experience, Imogen, of car companies, what's it like being inside one?
Oh, great question. Do we have anyone else who works at an OEM here out of interest? Show of hands. Okay. It's really interesting. And I should say that my experience at Jaguar Land Rover was utterly incredible. I went there as a graduate engineer, so I was 21, 22 at the time, and I joined the aerodynamics team as a design engineer, and I worked very closely with the designers to work out how efficient should you make vehicles, which is quite difficult when you look at a Range Rover and it is essentially a brick punching through the air. But what that experience gave me is this phenomenal insight into a world in which you are creating such complicated things. Such complicated things that somehow all come together and make a vehicle, and I'm still astounded that it is possible. But secondly, you are working with people who may be in that industry for 40 years. And change is scary, I understand that, and it also becomes very difficult to change course of a big, behemoth, bloated organisation in many respects and change it onto a new path. The other challenge that you have as well is that you build this phenomenal community around a big industry. So in Jaguar Land Rover, it's based in an area called Gaydon, which is near Warwick in the UK, and everyone in that community works at Jaguar Land Rover, and if not Jaguar Land Rover, Aston Martin, and then a couple of people who work for National Grid. And it means that you end up having this very Warwick-centric view of the world, in which your world is Range Rovers and Jaguars, and it requires real bravery from that company to look out and think, no, this is what else is happening in the world, and this is how we need to pivot. So it was a phenomenal experience, and I think that insight into how difficult getting agile decision making within a massive organisation is, and how easy it is to become sort of so centred on your direct experience of the world rather than looking up and taking notice of what's happening around you.
So Sandy, you've been in the industry a minute or two longer than Imogen.
Thank you.
So, like, you must have been to like Wolfsburg and GM and all those kind of. I mean, did you work for? Was it GM or Ford you used to work for?
Actually, the big OEM that I was actually employed by was Ford. So I started as a manufacturing engineer in an engine plant, and I worked my way up to basically executive role in finance staff. So go figure. So anyways, the thing that I'm not going to talk too much about those experiences, but the thing that I learned quickly was that I did not want to be on the management ladder. I wasn't good for politics. I wasn't cute. I didn't tell funny stories. I was definitely an engineer, and even though finally ultimately I got into finance staff, I knew what I knew, and I knew one thing for sure: I did not want to be a boss. I was happy to be on E-roll, but I was on the technical ladder. The guys that were in the other ladder, they were nasty. I was going to say nasty, but yeah. But anyhow, you have to have a different attitude. Actually, I just watched something on the plane coming up here, and it was called BlackBerry, right? And that guy that ran BlackBerry, yeah, that's picture 10,000 of those guys building. That's world headquarters. So I worked for them directly, but then almost everybody that you can see around here, we work for in a corporate kind of way. So Ford is represented here, but so is BMW. That was a big customer for us. General Motors has been a big customer for us. Toyota, Nissan to some extent, Stellantis, before it was Stellantis, when it was Fiat Chrysler, we spent a lot of time with them, on and on and on. At the end of the day, they all have the same weakness. They fall into the automotive trap, and that is car career, decision making. If it's good for the car and it's good for my career, it's an easy path. If it's good for the car, but it's risky for my career, not a chance. If it's bad for the car, but it could be good for my career, I'm in all day long. And that, believe it or not, that's not a kidding kind of thing. That is what happens. So the bloating and some of the nasty decisions and basically the incredible amount of dragging of feet that you find from most guys that are in here right now, that's all the corporate culture.
So I'm going to segue neatly from Ford, who I think we all agree are actually making a decent fist of it. We had Jim Farley on our podcast recently. They seem very committed. They've got some good product lineup. But let's go back to GM. The other big kind of elephant. They had the EV1. We all know what happened. If you haven't seen Who Killed the Electric Car, I highly recommend going to watch that on YouTube. And then we also know Toyota had an electric RAV4 for a brief time. But the EV1 and things like that inspired the beginnings of Tesla, right? With Eberhard and Tarpening, and so I'm just thinking, Tesla have had a huge impact. Would we be where we are now without what's happened from a Tesla perspective? John number one.
John number one. Yeah, I mean, real quick, I've driven Teslas for 10.5 years, so I was probably one of the first people in Canada other than a Roadster to have a Model S. And at the time, I was taking a chance. We were true, really early adopters back then. When I put my car in order, we didn't even know that Supercharging network was going to exist. So I've grown, I'm on my 7th Tesla, believe it or not. I've been to the Fremont plant 7 times. I mean, I'm Tesla all in. And I think one of the biggest differences is, and I'm going to be frank, we're talking about maybe controversial, I'm not that happy with some of the decisions that Elon's making out in the public domain with X and things like that. But he's got the vision. That's the difference. He knows what has to happen, and he's making it happen. And I think we're talking about which vehicles are going to be in the electric graveyard, and I think a lot of these other companies don't have that vision from the top down. Let's be honest, if the person at the top wants something to happen, he's going to make it happen. And, I'm going to name some. I think Mazda is going to be in trouble. I think Subaru.
Whoa. We haven't got to that.
That's what you asked for.
I'm trying to tease the audience. They're all like, we're
sorry.
Wait. So we don't pull any punches. We'll let you do that in full in a second. But let's just build up to that slowly. From my perspective, what's interesting though is like you've got your Cybertruck. Your Cybertruck proudiness. You may well be fanboy 9 out of 10. I mean, I'm pretty keen on Teslas as well. I'm pretty confident too. Let's be honest. But they're not here, right? At this show, for example, and we've got lots of OEMs here, and they wanted a cheap rate to appear, and we declined them to do that because they're not able to plead poverty anymore. I'm afraid, they're doing okay, right? So my point is there a point? I mean, they seem like an unstoppable growing force, but is there a point at which they can start to believe they're in hype and get into the same mentality that maybe has held back other car companies?
I think I think you really honestly have to look at key man risk. Like, I don't usually subscribe to that, but I think with Tesla that actually is a risk. So if Elon decided to retire or go to Mars or whatever, if he just decided to do something else, I think there would be the risk. I feel that way a little bit about Apple, that like Steve Jobs was a very important key man for Apple and saved it in the 1990s. And then since then, they've been doing really well. I'm wearing an Apple Watch, I've got an iPhone, but I don't feel like there's been that sense of urgency and focus that happens, and I think that's what you get from Elon with Tesla. Now, there's 120,000 plus employees at Tesla, so it's not him alone, but without that sort of top-down, he's the one who sent out the leaked email about the Cybertruck, speaking of, and said 10 microns, I think he wants the accuracy. So you love panel gaps, so if we can go to 10 micron panel gaps, that's pretty impressive stuff.
I mean, Model Y and Model 3 are dominating, let's not pretend. If you look at EV sales, EV volumes, Clean Technica, Model Y and Model 3, miles out in front. So I just wonder, sometimes a bit of a lag, right, between the decision making at top and what happens, and will things like X have an impact? Maybe not, but is it possible that Tesla becomes so big at some point that they become subject to similar inertia that other companies? But let's talk about who's chasing Tesla and who's coming up fast behind them. I've heard you talk about it often, and we cover Chinese cars a lot. I mean, you must be itching to talk about those brands.
Yeah, okay, so for me, if we look around here and we see all the guys on this floor and the one above, the biggest car company is not here right now. That will be BYD. BYD will be the biggest car company on the planet very soon. They are bigger now than Volkswagen and GM and Ford and everybody else in China. And the projection, I was asked a while ago, where do you think things are going to be with basically the big names in China and Europe? And I came back and I said BYD will be the biggest. And in China, 3 years ago, the European car companies, or let me rephrase that, the non-Chinese car companies had about 91% of the market share. And I believe that they'll have less than 30% by the time we get to 2030. That's a big drop. So to put things into perspective, Volkswagen lost 1 million vehicles last year. Having that kind of situation is not good for your health. Hence the reason that the president of Volkswagen, I forgot his name, and you know what? That's the thing. Yeah.
CEO, Blue.
Yeah. So anyway,
he's not here.
No,
He's
he's
just
not even
leaving
in
that
that.
way.
But at the end of the day, you were talking about leadership. I was asked a little while ago, why is Tesla number one? I said, okay, well let's ask. We'll have a little game. I said, who's in charge of Tesla? Elon Musk. Who's in charge of Ford? It's the guy is Farley's relative. Yeah, Jim Farley. That's correct. That's close enough. Who's in charge of Stellantis or Chrysler? Who's in charge of? And I went through a myriad of companies. Who's in charge of Toyota? Who's in charge of Honda? Nobody knows. And that's because one guy or some guys are leaders, and the rest they want to keep a low profile, and I don't know why. But
But I
that's.
think when it comes to leadership within innovation, I feel like there's two different types of leaders that you need. I think there's a leader like Elon Musk who will take you from 0 to 1, and then there's a leader that will take you from 1 to 100. And 100 being, I guess, your sort of steady state. And those two types of leadership are extremely different. And I think perhaps the challenge is that the CEOs of Honda, VW, you name it, they were operating in this 1 to 100 space. But this is such a fundamental shift that they needed to be 0 to 1 people and aren't. And Elon Musk is that 0 to 1 leader, and then I think he becomes a little bit dangerous when he's left in the 1 to 100. Well, that's certainly how I picture it.
So we're almost there where we're going to start to talk about the specific car companies, almost. But Imogen, you did something recently on the channel, the Fully Charged, about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think anyone's welcome to answer this, but I know Sandy might have a view and Imogen might have a view. It is a protectionist thing. I appreciate we're just above the border of the US, and I totally understand why it was brought in, but it has some upside and some downside, doesn't it?
Regardless of what you think about the administration, I actually think this is one thing that, and I'm a US citizen, so I think this was a really good idea, because if you look at Europe right now, Europe is being flooded by Chinese manufacturers, and the United States is at least delaying that. And they've moved a lot of stuff, and I just saw this morning there was a post on X that said that the US has started importing more goods from Mexico than China just now, and that's the first time in 20 years that they've done that. And I think that's, I don't know, I'm not super into protectionism, but I think in this case it was existential, and that this was a really good idea on the United States' part to try to pull this stuff back.
One thing you might not be aware of is here in Canada, most of the Model 3s and Ys are coming from China now. Because of that act, I believe that they want to make sure that most of the vehicles are produced in the US for everybody to get all the tax credits and rebates, et cetera, that there is. I don't know if that's good or bad. On one hand, it seems kind of weird that we're bringing all these thousands of cars over by boat to Canada when they're just coming across the border, but that is one impact that's affecting Canada.
I mean, when it was announced, I definitely thought it was a smart move, but every move has repercussions, consequences.
Yeah, so there's a little thing that consequences. In the 80s, when everybody wanted Sweden to join NATO, the U.S. made a few sweetheart deals for Sweden. One of them being that anything that was made in Sweden can come into the United States and it will be duty-free and without tariffs and all this other stuff. That is coming back to bite them in the ass. And that's a fact, and here's the reason why. Volvo is owned by Geely. Oh, who's that? Well, that's China. And a whole bunch of other different parts, if you like, of the European economy are owned by BYD. So that means that when you see that Volvo coming in, that is a Chinese vehicle. In essence, it's a Chinese vehicle. Lots of Chinese things get into that vehicle, and then they're shipped across to the United States and Canada. And protectionism is a great idea, but it's never worked. They used to say a cave is a grave. So if you think that you can survive by hiding in that cave and throwing rocks out, you're wrong. Sooner or later, you're going to need a drink of water, or you're going to need something to eat. And that's when you lose. A cave is a grave. I don't believe, I'm an industrial, I don't know what you call that, but whatever it is, industrialist, is that the right word? What is
Just
that?
free market capitalism.
Capitalist, there's the word I'm thinking. Yeah, capitalist, I am.
We do this session at most of our shows, but I need to rebrand it for next year. So next year it will be called "Is the Cave a Grave?" That might bring in a slightly different crowd, I'm thinking. But anyway, so in terms of this, Fully Charged Live Europe is our next stop in Amsterdam. We probably have 25 car companies there, of which 15 to 18 will be from Japan, Korea, and the bulk will be either out-and-out Chinese brands like BYD, NIO, Zeekr, Voya, stuff you haven't even heard of yet, and also the stealth brands, MG, Polestar, etc. So yeah, it's kind of, you can't hide forever, can you, in your cave? So, right, let's get to the bit that everyone's really come for. Who wants to go first? Who do you think really is at real risk of not being in business by 2030?
I'm going to do a little left field one, and I'm going to say internal combustion engine manufacturers. Because, I mean, why not? That's ultimately where the EV graveyard is going to send a lot of companies that don't switch fast enough to making EVs. Now, I think there's a lot of other companies that are making EVs right now that won't be around in 10 years, but why not start with the left field decision and say, like, if you don't make enough EVs in the next 5 years, you're in the graveyard.
So you're sitting on the fence then. I'm kidding. John, would you like to?
I started.
You stole my down earlier, right?
Yeah. I believe companies like Mazda, Subaru, even though they might be okay because they're owned 20% by Toyota. I didn't even think of Jaguar. But where's Jaguar? Who owns Jaguar now? Is it still Tata?
Yeah.
Okay. But
Tata.
yeah, Tata. So will those companies truly be in a graveyard, or will there be some amalgamation and be bought up, or somebody, they'll sort of go bankrupt and people will buy their production facility or something? I don't know, but I really can't see. I did a bit of research the other day, believe it or not, to come here today. And when you look up Stellantis, when you look up Subaru, when you look up Mazda, they have all this stuff on their websites about electrification. But then you look closely, 2026, 2028, 2030, they're miles away. Toyota, true, is a concern, although they're so big that I don't think it's going to happen, but they're so far behind. What was the one they sent, BYZ or BYZ, they call it? All kinds of problems with it.
It's such a good name.
Basically, it's a Subaru, or vice versa. And Mazda don't even think I have an EV in Canada, I could be wrong. And Stellantis doesn't have an EV to market right now. So those are the three that I think so far anyhow.
I'm going to let Sandy go last because share prices, stocks might drop. he has his say.
No one knows who I am.
So I can short some stocks.
But I might come to Imogen next though. What do you think? I mean, you've burnt your career in the car industry already, haven't you? You work Fully Charged. You work Robert and I now, so you can't go back. So
I'm fully committed. It's one of those questions that as soon as you ask me, I'm like, I can't think of a single car name in the whole world. But interesting that you mentioned Jaguar, and I feel conflicted about this because obviously I did work there. But had it not been for the Gigafactory announcement that we had earlier this year in the UK, I think Jaguar would have been severely at risk. And it remains to be seen whether they're still at risk because obviously it takes a lot of time to build a Gigafactory. I wouldn't be surprised if they get absorbed into a different brand. So I'm going to put Jaguar on the fence. VW are not having a particularly good time at the moment. I would put them in sort of the character category. And I think it's also going to be very, very interesting watching what happens with the unions and how that's going to impact the big three here, well, in North America. So that's a bit of a non-committal answer.
No, that's good. And there is going to be a bit of a Q&A at the end here as well, so we will do that in a minute. And just before Sandy sort of starts ticking off some names, Sandy, it seems to me, and you know this, that BMW have got JV joint venture stuff going on in China, right? And there's a lot of that, right? Are we going to see some reverse takeovers possibly, as well as some companies just not being able to hack it?
I don't think BMW is going to be reverse engineered. I met the Quant family, so that ain't going to happen. So Mrs. Quant is a very tough lady, and she raised her grandchildren to be even tougher. So I don't think BMW's got any real big problems there. I will tell you though, I did an i7 review, and I was shocked, pleasantly shocked, at what I got when they let me drive it around. It was the third BMW that I've driven, fourth, that I've driven that's been an EV. So I had a BMW i3 when they first came out, and that definitely, from a technology standpoint, phenomenal. I was so impressed. Ugliest car on the planet. If they would have taken the same guys that designed the BMW i7 and put them on the BMW i3, there would not be a Tesla. And quite frankly, from a technology standpoint, and just underneath the radar, BMW's probably got everybody fooled. Now,
Fix the grills.
so what?
Fix their grills.
The grill is hideous, and again, I don't know why they keep doing this. Why do they always want to have, hey, I got an idea, no, they don't say that. I have a good idea. I know how we can make an ugly car. And they do it. So that's kind of my go. But I drove the car. It's quiet as a tomb. It's got all kinds of good things going. And as you probably know, BMW owns Rolls-Royce. And the new Rolls-Royce Spectre just came out, and everybody says there's no noise. That's the rule that used to work a lot in Great Britain. And the motto at Rolls-Royce was, quiet means quality. And that's kind of what you get when you get a Spectre.
But why no NACS with BMW? Why are they a laggard?
Because they got in with General Motors on, hey, I got an idea, let's become our own little charging network. Okay, well, there you go. Everybody makes mistakes. I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about what Imogen just had to say here. Okay, you mentioned a car company that I'm staring at right now, and the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So the biggest car company on the planet used to be VW. I'm not sure where they are now. I think they've fallen below Toyota, but they are in the worst shape of any car company. They are not jumping into the new technology that's out there. The new technology that everybody else is getting into is gigacastings and mega castings. They're not going in that direction. The reason for that is because they have unions. And most of that company is owned, or a portion of the company is owned by, anyway, so it's a giant union, basically, and they don't want to shut down stamping plants. Okay, fine. Here's something that you're going to find out. I'm going to be giving a speech. I've already done the calculations. And in essence, what winds up happening is if you use the newer technologies that everybody else is trying to get to as quick as possible, you're going to find out that the plant is like a third of the size it used to be. You need a tenth of the number of people inside. The amount of energy goes down. The footprint goes down. All the peripherals like utilities and whatnot. I mean, it's an amazing difference when you start following Tesla. So that's a company that really is going to have problems.
Right, so we've got time for, I think, 3 questions or so if you want to come up to the microphone in the front. And I would just say, from a fully charged perspective, I'm sure we all feel the same way. No one wants to see companies fail, but this is a huge game of musical chairs, and at some point, the music stops, brand loyalty crystallizes again, and some people are going to be left without a chair. Now, We've got a little thing here. I think it tells me how long I've got left, or I might need to diffuse it. So just to say that I'm just watching the questions. Now, questions need to end with a question mark. That's my only rule. If that would be quite short. Rich, I think you're going to go first.
Oh yeah, hi. So a lot of companies seem to be using the word electrified or electrification as a hedge with plug-in hybrids. And, do you think that this is ultimately going to be holding them back rather than embracing full electric cars?
I'm going to take this one actually in the interest of a time economy. All I can tell you is that in every market that's ahead of this one, let's take Norway, Sweden, Netherlands, wherever it may be, you can see the FEV number diminishing and diminishing and the BEV number going up. So I would say once people get in them and realise there is a difference, I do think it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think anyone who's really hoping that that middle way, it's never good to sit on the middle, is it? It's probably going to struggle. Next.
Sorry, real quick, I would just say also the problem is governments are still giving subsidies to hybrids, so it doesn't help that.
Except for the US.
I am Daniel Breton, the CEO of Electric Mobility
Nice to
Canada.
meet you.
So I'm old enough to have worked selling cars when I was young, assembling cars in Sainte-Thérèse in Quebec when I was young. And over the past 50 or 60 years, I saw companies like Mercury and Plymouth and Oldsmobile and Saturn and many other brands that disappeared and no one died. So is it such a big deal if some companies merge or disappear?
Okay, so I can answer a little bit of that. I don't think you'll see the companies disappear. I think what you're going to do is you're going to see them shrink, and so Volkswagen again back. They've already gotten it right from the top. We need to cut 30% because we've lost 30% of the market share. They'll shrink. They'll try and figure out some way of how to survive, but they definitely will get a lot smaller.
Do you think they'll merge or someone that will buy the other one?
Maybe. I personally wouldn't put a nickel into a merger right now. If I get asked, and sometimes I do, never in a million years would I recommend any mergers or anything going on if I was being asked.
I mean, quite often it's not the executives that get punished; it's the workforce that will lose out as a result of this. So yeah, maybe a death is not the end of a brand going away is not the end of the world, but it was the workforce that will feel it. Isn't it? Next.
I was kind of surprised, considering how much people like to bash General Motors, that there wasn't too much mentioned here. And I think one thing that's kind of hopeful is seeing the bright drop over there. Is it possible that one of the things that might save these companies is, like, we tend to talk about personal cars because we own them, but really how much electric buses, transport, might that be the thing that saves one company over another?
I definitely, but I think exactly what Sandy said. Suddenly you're going from manufacturing consumer vehicles and buses and transport to just buses and transport. So yeah, they'll survive, but they'll just be a lot smaller. I want to throw in one thing. MG, I think, was brilliant. Is it G that bought them?
SAIC.
SAIC. But yeah, so essentially what a lot of companies might do is purchase a brand name once it becomes cheap enough. Because it's not a bad move if it gets cheap enough.
Yeah, that's great. And last question, sorry for the gentleman behind. This is about to blow up, I think. So.
First of all, thank you all for being here. It's been great. Now, there's a rumor that you guys might be able to call Scott, maybe even Brian White. Ford is working with VW on an electric vehicle that we all know about. It's been delayed. What about Ford doing an electric Beetle? It'll be the lightning bug.
Well, it's got the name.
Throw that guy out.
We're going to end on that. We're going to end on that. Anyway, just thank you very much for coming to this session. I have to say it's great to see so many car companies here. I'm not just saying that. To me, when they're in the room, they're meeting you guys, getting your feedback. That's the best place they could possibly be, because there's so many electric vehicle drivers and prospective electric vehicle drivers in the room. They need to hear how they can iterate, move faster, and keep up the pace and still be here in a few years' time. And we'll be here, at least in 1 more year's time. We'll be back here in Canada. And I'd just like to pay great thanks to John, Sandy, John, and John on the end there for this great session. Thank you very much.